Hello everyone, Jake here with Unreal RPG Mastery. In this video, we're going to create a hit detection system. So that way when the player attacks an enemy, we can detect a hit, apply damage, and things like that. Okay, let's get started. The first thing we need to do is create the collision component. The reason we're doing this as an actor component is so that we can give the component to any actor and give that actor a hit detection system. So you can give it to a weapon and give that weapon a hit detection system, or you can add it to a character blueprint and the character will have a hit detection system. Let's get started. So go to Combat System, Blueprints, Components, and let's create a new component. We need an actor component. We'll call this one Collision Component. BP underscore collision component. We can also add BP underscore to this as well. I have a flowchart here just to show you the basic design of the system we're going to create. The way this is going to work is we're going to trace for hits on tick with a multi-sphere trace for objects. The object that we're going to be tracing for is a pawn. Since we're tracing for hits on tick, we may hit an actor hundreds of times in a single swing. So to add protection to actors so that we only hit them once, we're going to use an already hit actor array. So that way we can keep track of the actors that we've already hit. If the actor we hit is inside the already hit actor array, we cannot hit the actor until the array is cleared. So we're going to have a function to enable the collision. This function will set a collision boolean to true and clear the already hit actors. Another function we're going to need is the disable collision function, which will simply set the collision boolean to false. We're also going to need a function to clear the hit actors. So for this function, we're going to get the array of already hit actors and clear the contents from the array. Then we're going to have a tick event. We're going to check, is the collision enabled? If it is, we're going to call the collision trace. The collision trace will run a multi-sphere trace for objects from start to end location. And since it's a multi-sphere trace, it will have multiple hits. So we're going to go for each hit. We're going to break the hit. And from there, we're going to check, was actor not recently hit? If actor was not recently hit, then we're going to add hit actor to already hit actors list, which is the already hit actors array. And then after that, we're going to call on hit. So now that we know the design of what we're going to do, it's going to make the implementation a lot easier. So let's go back to the engine. Okay, here inside of our collision component, we already know exactly what we need to do because we went over the design. From the design, we know the variables that we're going to need. We're going to need a boolean to know if the collision is enabled or not. And we're going to need an array of already hit actors. Make this into an array. Call this already hit actors. Okay, now let's create the functions that we need. Let's add a custom event, enable collision. And we're going to need a disable collision. We're also going to need a collision trace event. And we're going to need a clear hit actors event. Okay, this function we already know we're going to need to clear the hit actors. And we know in this function we're just going to need to set collision enabled to false. And in this function we're going to need to call clear already hit actors and set collision enabled to true. And we're also going to need the tick event, and on the tick event we're going to need to check, is the collision enabled? If the collision is enabled, then we're going to run the collision trace function. Now it's time to create the collision trace function, which is going to be the biggest function for this system. So we're going to do multi-sphere trace for objects. And we're going to have a start and end. The way we're going to get a start and end is through socket locations. So that way we can change the size of the collision based on the weapon size. So to do that, we're going to need a primitive component. So that way we can get socket locations. So let's make this new variable a primitive component. We can call this one collision mesh component. Okay, and what we can do here is get socket location for the start, and we can also get socket location for the end. And we can promote these to variables. We can call this one start socket name, and we can call this one end socket name. And we can make these visible and editable. We can also promote radius to a variable, so we can adjust the radius, trace radius. By default, we can make this something like 20. And if you want, you can also promote the object types to a variable. These are the collision object types. Make that visible. And by default, we can make pawn one of the object types that we're going to be using. And here we have actors to ignore. We can also promote that to a variable. And this is our actors to ignore. So that way we can add or remove things from this array. We can also promote draw debug type to a variable. So that way if you want to visualize the trace for testing purposes. Okay, now we're going to for each loop for all of the hits. So we're going to loop through all of the hits. We're probably going to use this hit in later functions. So what we're going to need to do is just promote this to a variable and call this one the last hit. Now from our design flowchart, we know at this point we're going to need to add a condition and only continue if the hit actor was not already hit. So we can go ahead and break the last hit. If we can get already hit actors, and we can see contains item. Get the hit actor. Does the already hit actors not contain the hit actor? If that is true, we can continue. We can, if you want to, promote this to a variable so that way you can use it later. And now we need to add already hit actor. So that way, as soon as we hit an actor, we're going to add that actor to the already hit actors, and we will not be able to hit the actor again. Okay, now we need an event to fire in the owner of this component. So if you add the component to a weapon actor, we need an event to fire inside that weapon actor. Or if it's in a character, we need an event to run inside that character. You could do this with an interface function, but instead we're going to use an event dispatcher. And I will show you why here in a little bit. So here under event dispatchers, let's create a new event dispatcher. We'll call this one on hit. And we'll add an input here. This will be hit result. We'll call the input hit result. Okay, now compile and select the on hit dispatcher and select call. And here we can call on hit and get the last hit and plug that in here as the input. Some of these variables we want to make them private because some of these variables we don't want them to be accessible outside of this component. For already hit actors, we're going to make that private. And since we made this private, we can create a getter function to get already hit actors. Get already hit actors. Making certain variables private and creating getter functions and setter functions to access and manipulate the variable is a common practice in programming. Okay, and for B is collision enabled. Let's make that private and create a function is collision enabled. Let's also make the last hit private. And let's create a function to get last hit. Okay, let's do the same thing with the collision mesh component. We'll make that private, and we'll create a function to set the collision mesh component. And let's also create a getter function for the collision mesh component. And if you want to, you can go ahead and add comments to all these events. Okay, if you want, we can move all of these editable variables into their own category. We can call this at category initialization. Okay, now let's add our collision component to the weapon actor. Just go to Combat System, Blueprints, Actors. Let's go to the base weapon actor. And here we can add the collision component. Okay, now here on equipped, what we can do is we can get our collision component and we can set collision mesh. And for the collision mesh, we can call the function get item mesh. And for the collision mesh, we can call it get item mesh, which is a function that we created earlier. And we can also click on the collision component. We can see the start socket name and the end socket name. We'll call this one weapon start. We'll call this one weapon end. Now let's go ahead and add these two sockets to our weapon. So what we can do is open up our tough sword, open full blueprint editor, and select the item mesh and open it up. And we need to add some sockets. So here in the socket manager, we can create a socket. And this one will be weapon start. Okay, and then we need to create another socket, and this one will be weapon end. And drag this all the way to the end here. So this way we can adjust the size of the collision to be different for each weapon. Okay, let's go back to the base weapon. Make sure we have weapon start and weapon end here. And just for testing purposes so that we can see it's working, let's set draw debug type to for duration. Now one issue that we may have as well is we do not want the character to hit himself. So if the character is searching for a pawn, the character may accidentally hit themselves. So to prevent that, we actually already have something implemented for that. So if we go to our collision component, we'll see we have actors to ignore. So basically all we need to do is get actors to ignore, and we need to add unique. And the actor that we need to add is going to be the owner of this actor, which in this case the owner of this actor should be the player character. Actually, I don't like that we are accessing the variable directly. I think it would be cleaner programming practice to encapsulate this variable. So let's go to the collision component and select actors to ignore, and let's make this private. And then let's create a function. We'll call it add actor to ignore. Okay, let's get actors to ignore. Call add unique. And plug this in as the input to this function. Okay. Okay, now we need to create another function, remove actor to ignore. Okay. And now we can create a getter function. Okay, let's make this a pure function. Now let's go back to our base weapon. Now we should get a compile error. Yep, there we go. Okay, and now what we can do is delete this and this. Let's call add actor to ignore. And plug the return value of getOwner into inActor. Now compile and save. And now I'm going to show you why we added this event dispatcher here. And the reason why is because once you add a component to an actor, if you select the component, your event dispatcher will show up here under the events. And you can just select a plus icon here to add the event. And so this will add the event here to our actor, and this event will run whenever we run this dispatcher message. So to test that, we can print string here. We can say print hit detected. Okay, compile and save. Okay, and before we can test this out, there's another really big important step that we need. We need a way to enable a collision and disable a collision. And the way we're going to do that is with an animation notify state. So that way at a certain point in the animation, we can enable the collision, and at a certain point in the animation, we can disable the collision. So let's go ahead and create the hit detection notify state. So we're going to go to anim notifies, right click and select blueprint class. We're going to need a anim notify state. We'll call this one collision trace underscore ANS. Okay, so we need to override the receive notify begin and the receive notify end. On receive notify begin, we need to get the owner. And from the owner, we need to get component by class. And the class that we need to get is the combat component. And the reason why we're getting the combat component is because we need to get a reference to the weapon. So from the combat component, we can get the main weapon. And from the main weapon, we can check is valid. And if the weapon is valid, we need to get the collision component. And then we need to enable collision. Okay, and on notify end, we can copy all of this and paste it here. And from here, we need to get collision component. And from the collision component, we need to disable collision. Okay, now let's add this notify state to our attack animations. Let's go to combat system, force files, animations, light sword, light attack. Let's open this one up here. We can add a new notify track. And here at the point in the animation where we want the collision to start, we can go ahead and add the notify state and make it go all the way to the end and add that here. And if we want this to be more visible because it's important, let's go ahead and open the notify blueprint. And we can set the notify color. So let's set this to red. Okay, and as you can see now it's red. Okay, now let's go to attack 2. Here we can add a notify state, and this will be the collision trace notify state. Okay, let's go to the final attack. Okay, save all, and let's test it out and see if it works. As you can see, the collision trace is working exactly as we intend. So when he attacks, it's searching for a hit. When he finishes, the collision trace is disabled. Now let's see if the collision system will hit upon. So let's add another version of the character blueprint here, and let's turn him around. Okay. As you can see, hit detect is being printed. It's only being printed once each time we hit the character. So everything is working perfectly now. But instead of just printing hit detected here, what we can do is we can break the hit result. If we can get the hit actor, we can call apply damage. And the damage that we can apply, we can just promote that to a variable, and this can be the weapon's damage. We can just give this weapon a base damage of 20 damage. And for the event instigator, we can get instigator controller and plug that into event instigator. And for the damage causer, that's going to be the owner. Okay, compile and save. Okay, and inside the combat character, we can add an event any damage. We can add a print string here. And from there we can append. And we can plug damage into A. We can say space of damage was applied by, add another pin, and we'll get the damage causer. Let's make this points of damage. So that will be damage, points of damage was applied by, and then the damage causer. Okay, let's test it out. As you can see, it prints 20 points of damage was applied by BP_combat player character. Now that we have a system that can detect hits and apply damage, we can now start working on some damage effects, such as hit visual effects and hit reaction animations. So for hit reactions, it's actually better that we use point damage instead of any damage. And instead of apply damage, let's apply point damage. And the reason why we're going to use point damage is because point damage has some extra information that we can send. So damage actor will be hit actor. The base damage is going to be damage. For the hit from direction, we can just get the owner and get actor forward vector. And we need to plug in the hit information and plug the event instigator in. The damage causer actually should be self because this actor is applying the damage. Okay, now delete that, compile and save. Okay, let's go to the combat character, and here we can do event point damage. And we can move these things here to the event point damage. And we can just add some more information, unplug this, we can add damage causer. We can plug in the damage causer, and after this we can add instigator, and we can get, and from the instigator we can get controlled pawn, and this is going to be like the instigator character that applied the damage, and the damage causer is going to be the actor that applied the damage. And let's leave this on screen for like 5 seconds. Okay, now let's see what sort of information we get. 20 points of damage was applied by damage causer tough sword, instigator BP_combat character. And so now let's apply damage effects. And the first damage effect that we're going to apply is a hit sound. So we can go play sound at location. And the location that we're going to use is a hit location here. And the sound that we're going to use is the Guardian Impact. But actually, let's browse to that location. And let's create a cue from that. So create cue. We can just call that one Guardian Impact _cue. Open it up. And now we need to add all of these. And we can add a random node here. Okay, now save. And now let's select the cue, compile and save. And the next thing that we can do is spawn particle at location. And the location again will be the hit location. And for the emitter template, I have a blood particle, but that's not included with the course files because unfortunately I don't have a free particle effect for blood to give you. However, you should be able to get some sort of impact effect from Paragon or Infinity Blade or something like that, and you can get those completely free from the marketplace. Now I changed the scale to 0.7, that's for my particular impact effect, so that is probably likely something that you don't have to do unless you want to adjust the scale of your impact effect. And after that, we can play montage. And we can play the hit reaction montage. We can go to content, combat system, course files, animations, hit reactions. And for now, let's get hit reaction front. So let's create a montage from that. Let's make sure root motion is enabled. Okay, now we need to go back to the character blueprint and select the animation. Okay, and before we test, let's go back to the base weapon. Let's select the collision component and let's set the draw debug type to none. So that way we can see our hit effects better. Everything seems to be working well. As you can see, we can use the hit detection system we created to get things like the location of the hit, so we can use them to spawn impact effects at the hit location. And something else we'll need for the hit reaction system is we'll need to know if the character is reacting to a hit, so that way if we try to attack or dodge, the character won't be able to do that because he's in the middle of reacting to a hit. So here, we can just add B is disabled, so the hit reaction will disable the character. And right here, we'll set that to true. And here on combat reset, we'll set it to false. And now all we have to do is open up the hit reaction animation, and near the end, we can add reset combat. That brings us to the end of this video. We now have a system that can detect hits and apply damage. We have the ability to specify when the trace turns on and off through a notify state. We can specify the start and end location of our collision trace. We now have a system that plays a hit sound and spawns an impact effect at the impact location. The character will also react to the hit and be disabled during hit stun. Thanks for watching. I hope you look forward to the next video where we implement character death.